Prep Huddle Live on StrivSports.com. It is a Wednesday, it is the lunchtime, and it is time to talk more district wrestling. We've got Rob Sanders of AnyWrestle.com joining us again on the Truck Center Company's hotline. Rob, it's a little bit like Christmas Eve. We've got districts coming up. It's not as quite as big as state, but it's the first step to get to Omaha.
Definitely. You've got to take care of business this weekend to have a shot to get a state medal and get on that podium.
So now that we've got the conference titles all wrapped up from last weekend, normally we'd say, well, who are the big winners? Well, usually it's the cast of characters that you would expect to come out of conference. But were there any conferences that you said, wow, that was a bit of an upset in the finals there?
Yeah, the GNAC conference and the EMC conference both had two matches that were, you could say, upsets. But in the GNAC, at 132, number one in Class A, Nick James of Kearney won 11-7 over Connor Locks of Hastings, who's number one in Class B. And they had a good match earlier in the year where Locks was leading 5-0, and then Nick James threw him and pinned him. And then the other weight class was 220, where another Kearney guy, Izzy Batista, at 220, he pinned number two, Wyatt Olcott from Columbus. And that's a pretty significant win there for him. And at the Eastern Midlands Conference, at 106 in the finals, Jackson Nilsson of Blair pinned the top-ranked guy, Chase Larson from Plattsmouth, pinned him in sudden victory. And Jackson Nilsson's been ranked kind of in and out of the rankings. He's wrestled a pretty tough schedule, so seems like he is peaking at the right time. And then at 152, Cody Everhart of Gretna won a close 9-7 match over Logan McDonald from Bennington, who's number two. And they had a 2-point match earlier in the season also.
Rob, we just talked to Coach Ken Striv up at North Bend about Zach Bohr, who became the first sophomore in Nebraska history to reach 100 career wins. Can you put that in kind of a historical perspective for us? Because there have been an awful lot of really, really good wrestlers in this state, and Zach is to 100 wins before anybody else.
So to clarify that a little bit, he's the first sophomore to reach 100 wins in the regular season. A former 4-time state champion, Isaac DeLoa from Millard South, I just found out a couple of days ago that he reached 100 wins at state duels in his sophomore year. So the state duels adds a few extra matches, but he got it in the postseason of his sophomore year. So, but Zach Bohr, he's been on national teams for Nebraska USA for years, and I think he won more than 60 matches last year, and his team did qualify for the state duels, so that always adds 3 to 4 matches. And with the increased match count, you can attribute that a lot to dual tournaments becoming more popular. So you can get as many 10 matches in a 2-day tournament with these duels, and the coaches really like this because your less experienced kids don't lose 2 matches and they're done for the weekend. So regardless of how those lesser experienced kids compete and how they finish, they can still get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 matches. And so with some things like that, that's why we're getting more wrestlers reaching 100 wins earlier. And on Nebraska USA Wrestling's social media pages, we've tried to catalog most of them. So parents and coaches and even grandparents send in pictures of their kids that have hit 100 wins, 150, and even Nate Rodriguez in Millard South hit 175 wins this year. But it's becoming pretty prevalent to hit 100 wins beginning of your junior year if you're placing at state both years.
So when you're the studs, you're getting up there a little bit as far as all those are concerned. So let's go to districts this weekend now. There's always some fun ones, but there's a couple of districts, maybe a district in each of the 4 classes that could really stand out as far as some top-notch wrestling.
So in Class A, A4, which is being held at Millard West, it has number 3 Millard West and number 4 Burke. And then also Omaha Central, who has been in and out of the top 10. They're really surging right now. They've got close to a full lineup, if not a full lineup. They have more than a handful of guys who are probably, if we ranked to 7th and 8th, they've got a handful right there, so they could really break out in the next couple of weeks. And what makes this district exciting is there's only 9 points that separate Millard West and Burke in the team rankings, and those totals are based on the placement points of where their individuals are ranked. And 8 of the weight classes in this district have 2 guys ranked in the top 6, and 106 and 195 are probably the toughest, with each of them having 2 ranked guys and then a third guy who's not ranked but could very easily win a state medal at Omaha next weekend. And then in Class B, we've got B4 at McCook, which is all those Western schools, and it includes third-ranked Scottsbluff and then number 10 Sydney. And then we've got a host of schools with Alliance, Gothenburg, Cozad, Holdridge, and Lexington, who all have some pretty good depth top to bottom, but they've each got a couple of guys who could be in the state finals and finish in the top 3. So in this district, there's a wrestler ranked in every single weight class. There's 5 weight classes where they have 2 guys ranked in the top 6. And then at 182 and 220, there's 3 guys ranked in the top 6. So that 4th spot at those 2 weight classes is going to be pretty coveted. And probably the marquee weight is 132 pounds, which it'll be a rematch of last year's B4 district finals at 126 and the state finals. So we've got Mario Wybera of Scottsbluff and Joe Ritson of Striv School Shadron. So last year, Ritson won in the district finals, and then in the state finals, Wybera turned it around. Ritson's a senior, Wybera's a junior, and they could very well be in the state finals again this year. And then for Class C, this is the C4 district, where we've got Valentine, who's the heavy favorites to win it in Class C. They have 10 guys ranked 5th or higher out of the 14 weight classes. 2 guys ranked 1st, 2 guys ranked 2nd, and 2 guys ranked 3rd. So their firepower is pretty impressive. Number 5, Kearney Catholic, is also in that district, along with Broken Bow and Ord, both of whom have been in the top 10 at different points during the season. So what really makes this district special is there's 31 wrestlers ranked in the top 6, and the next closest district in Class C has 19 wrestlers ranked in the top 6. And every weight has at least 1 guy ranked in the top 6. At 195, there are 4 guys ranked in the top 6. At 106 and 170, there's 3 guys ranked in the top 6. And then there's 9 other weight classes that have 2 guys ranked in the top 6. Now for Class D, this district D3 is being held at Amherst, and this district is going to have some implications on really how much teams like Plainview and Burwell can challenge Amherst. So Amherst is trying to win their 8th straight team title, and they've got their firepower, but they're trying to qualify as many guys as possible who can win a couple of matches at state, get some bonus points to really put them over the top against Plainview and Burwell, who maybe have a little more firepower than Amherst, but not quite the depth. And the highlight weights here are 138, 145, and 220, as there's potential state placers who might not even qualify.
That's a lot to go through. You guys do a fantastic job breaking all that down. So now I got to ask you, if you got to be just a fan for a weekend instead of being quite as involved with everything as you are, Rob, what's the one district that you would love to just go and watch and be an observer for a day?
So since I live in Lincoln, I get to see a lot of the Lincoln and Omaha teams and teams within about an hour. I also coach at Nebraska Wesleyan, and so I haven't got to watch as much high school wrestling as I would have liked to this year, but I grew up in a small town called Blanding, Utah, which is about 40 miles from the Four Corners National Monument. And that's, for people who don't know, that's where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. And so growing up about 6 hours away from Salt Lake City, it didn't make sense to drive 4 to 6 hours every weekend. So we wrestled a lot of teams from Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. So the district I would go to is to B4 out in McCook, because a lot of those teams out there, they wrestle in South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado. And we have a pretty good idea of how tough a handful of their guys are out in that area, because they're returning state placers, returning state champs. But there's a lot of newcomers who have been doing well in those tournaments in the other states, and they've got some hype and a head of steam built up behind them. So when you compare those to this eastern part of the state, where we kind of know where these eastern wrestlers match up, they've seen each other more than a handful of times during the year. It's that unknown factor that makes wrestling more exciting than a lot of sports, I think, because anything could happen. Somebody could slip on a banana peel, head into weigh-ins. Their dog could die the night before. There's just so many variables that go into it.
And you guys will be on top of all of that. And now, Rob, you mentioned Nebraska Wesleyan, where you're helping coach this year. They've brought back the program, and you tell me right before we go on air that you guys have a really unique way of, or not way of wrestling, but event that you guys are heading off to. Tell us about wrestling in the ballroom.
So it's called Dinner and a Show, and we're going to be wrestling in the Dow's Grand Ballroom, which is at Buena Vista University in Storm Lake, Iowa. So there's a formal dinner. There's going to be tables with white tablecloths, just kind of like a banquet type atmosphere around us, and kind of takes the two extremes to where people will be wearing suit and ties and big dresses, and then you take wrestlers in a singlet, just throwing each other around. So it'll be interesting to see how close they put the tables to the actual mat, because in wrestling, the action oftentimes carries off the mat. And although it would be cool to see somebody get put through a table, it's probably not in the best interest and for the fans and the university. But when I was in college, we wrestled in a kind of a similar event at Iowa State, where we had half of the facility, and then the gymnastics, the women's team, had half of the facility, and they called it Beauty and the Beast. And wrestlers were obviously the Beast, but it's pretty unique because action is going on at both times. So when the gymnastics girls are doing their floor routine, there's kind of flowery music going on in the background, and there's a couple of times when I was wrestling and I would kind of get unfocused in between periods and listen to the music. So it just makes it interesting, and it's a good way to bridge two different communities and fan bases.
There is no sport like wrestling that will go to some of the lengths they will to expand the exposure of the sport, and I love the different things that wrestlers are willing to do to kind of get out there for events. So that would be fun no matter what. Rob Sanders, AnyWrestle.com, Nebraska Wesleyan as well. Good luck to you guys, and I'm sure we will be talking in the next week with State coming up next weekend.
Definitely, love to. Thanks for having me on, Eric.
We're going to come back for Prep Huddle Live right after this, and we are going to have Tony Chapman grace us with his presence again this week. So stay with us on Striv Sports.